Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Lauren Lemanchek. Right now, just into the newsroom, Minnesota State Senator Justin Eichhorn has resigned his seat. That's after being accused of trying to solicit sex from a minor, and just a half hour before his Senate colleagues were expected to expel him. Now, he is facing federal charges for allegedly trying to solicit a girl who he thought was 17 years old for sex. He was arrested earlier this week during a sting operation in Bloomington. And this comes as the Minnesota State Senate again set to vote on his expulsion this morning. And all of this is unfolding quickly after his arrest. But court documents show he'd been in contact multiple times with an undercover officer since last week. Now, here's a closer look at how we got here.
On the afternoon of March 11th,
we got a few legacy bills up today.
Republican State Senator Justin Eichhorn led a Senate Environment Committee as the ranking minority member.
Then, with that, we are adjourned.
Just 4 hours later, around 9 p.m., prosecutors say Eichhorn sent his first text message to an undercover Bloomington police officer. According to federal charges, Eichhorn was responding to an online ad for sex posted by Bloomington PD during a sex trafficking operation. Over the next several days, prosecutors say Eichhorn repeatedly asked if the officer was available and discussed rates, even after the officer told Eichhorn they were an underage 17-year-old girl. The federal criminal complaint includes a text message from Eichhorn where he says, "It says age of consent is 16. Over 18 is in a position of authority." When Eichhorn tried to meet up in Bloomington, officers arrested him.
It's a very, very unfortunate situation.
GOP Senate leader Mark Johnson says Eichhorn should resign. His caucus is drafting a letter to strip him from committees and may consider voting to expel him as early as Thursday.
We're taking the action that we can from the caucus level and hoping to see that resignation.
Governor Tim Walz agrees.
Yes, I think he should resign.
Walz says Eichhorn should step down, just as he thinks DFL Senator Nicole Mitchell should step down. Mitchell, whose seat gives the DFL a one-vote majority in the Senate, faces a felony burglary trial after the legislative session.
I've stayed consistent on that when these things have happened. I think when you're in a position of elected office, the bar is higher from you.
That's a departure from DFL Senate leadership, which says Mitchell should get due process and hasn't officially called for Eichhorn to resign yet, although leader Erin Murphy called the allegations deeply disturbing. Meanwhile, DFL Senator Erin May Quaid released her own statement, saying Justin Eichhorn should resign from the jail cell where he thankfully resides as soon as humanly possible.
All right, you see how quickly this is all unfolding, and Danny Spiewak's been covering it since the very beginning. He joins us now from the state capitol. Danny, you mentioned in that story he had been under pressure to resign from members of his own caucus. Was there any doubt they were going to vote to expel Senator Eichhorn in just minutes this morning?
It looked like, especially increasingly so from last night into this morning, where basically all of the DFL senators started to say, yeah, he should resign. And you need a 2/3 majority from the Senate to expel a member, which has never happened either in the Senate or the House. But it started to look like, as we got toward 11 a.m., as they're just opening chambers now to start the session, he was certainly going to be the first legislator ever expelled in the history of Minnesota. And so he did draft that letter of resignation. The governor has accepted it. So no need to expel him anymore. It's over. But now it's just picking up the pieces and moving forward in the session with a member resigning.
All right, Danny, I'm just reading this statement that came from Senator Mark Johnson, the Republican leader. He says this is the right thing to do for his family and for the Senate. We're ready to move on and do the important work that needs to be done at the Capitol. Although Republicans have been asking for a long time for Democrats to vote to expel State Senator Nicole Mitchell, who you mentioned in your story, charged with felony burglary. Does this change the calculation at all for what happens with Senator Mitchell?
You know, that's a really big question. And I think when we get to talk to DFL leaders after the session today is definitely going to be something that comes up. You know, I don't think anybody in the state capitol would equate a burglary charge for Nicole Mitchell versus what is a federal charge of soliciting a minor for prostitution with Eichhorn. Obviously, no one's saying they're the same thing. But with the DFL, they've been saying for months that Senator Mitchell is afforded due process, innocent until proven guilty, and that she shouldn't be expelled or have to resign until she's able to finish her trial, which is after the legislative session. So it'll be interesting to hear how leaders explain that in terms of the differences in the cases or why there's a difference in the treatment, of course, with the charges being different. But that'll be a big question for the DFL if they'll reconsider what's going on with Mitchell or what Republicans will say in terms of how Mitchell should proceed as well. A lot of dynamics there with those two cases.
Yeah, and this has been such an interesting, would be a nice way to put it, chaotic session for the state legislature so far. At this point, Senate Democrats now, with Senator Eichhorn's resignation, have a 2-seat majority. Danny, what does this mean for their ability to get anything done? I think so many Minnesotans have been watching what happened in the House, where there was this stalemate for so long, and now this is happening in the Senate, and wondering, is there any work being done at the Capitol?
Yeah, I do wonder if that is something that the public is perceiving. I'm sure if you talk to lawmakers, they would say, well, we're doing a lot that's not being talked about, which is certainly true. And they're certainly going on with the normal business of the legislature. But with everything in the House, that was historic with the denial of quorum and skipping the session and the power struggle there on both sides. And then in the Senate, you now have 2 members charged with felonies, now one a former member because he just resigned. So it's overshadowing a lot of the work that they're doing. In this Senate case, you'll now have Democrats will have a 2-vote majority, 34 to 32. So they'll still basically be able to pass everything they would have even if Eichhorn was there. But more the optics of it, that you're moving forward. You have a pending criminal trial with a DFL member. You have another Republican member, now former, who's been he resigned because he's been charged federally with a very heinous crime allegation. So it just kind of does just overshadow a lot of the work they're doing. And then when it comes to the budget, you have the House, which is divided, split 67-67. So that'll have to be bipartisan budget negotiations. And anything the Senate passes will have to go through the House to get to the governor. So they're going to have to figure out to navigate all this and work on a bipartisan basis.
Danny, this is all unfolding so quickly. We are just getting word that Senator Justin Eichhorn has now been released from the Hennepin County Jail, where he was initially booked on these charges, but he remains in federal custody tonight. Initially, he was charged by the Hennepin County attorney for soliciting this minor for sex. Now those charges are federal, and so the U.S. attorney is prosecuting that case. I want to take a look at the Senate chambers right now. You can see members milling around, and it makes me wonder, Danny, what is the mood there at the state capitol today? And what are senators saying as they are in this chamber? We're seeing them close the door right now.
Yeah, and I'm standing, just for reference, I'm like on the corner, so I'm kind of looking at the chamber of that shot you're seeing. The normal activity of the business of the legislature has kind of been going on this morning. Just at first glance, it's pretty much looks like a normal morning. But I think just in conversations with people, it's just, I think with the heinous nature of the allegations, I do think it does in many ways cut across party lines. Obviously you've got political dynamics going on with what happened with Nicole Mitchell and what's happening with Eichhorn and what does it mean for the majority? What does it mean for the margin in the Senate? But I think just above all, I do think that everybody from both parties are just shocked by the allegations in terms of what a sitting state senator was attempting to do with allegedly with an undercover officer that he thought was an underage girl. So I just think that the allegations are so shocking to everybody that I think it cuts across party lines. It's kind of the mood that I'm sensing.
Yeah, I think you raise a great point, Danny, because I don't think anyone would equate a burglary at a family member's house with trying to solicit a minor for sex. And for those who aren't up to date on all the charges, I have them right here. Here's the federal indictment against Justin Eichhorn. According to undercover officers, and we need to be very careful here, he has not been convicted of anything. But according to federal prosecutors, undercover officers started communicating with him more than a week ago now. And he was replying to an ad he saw online for a young woman soliciting sex. He had several text messages allegedly with this undercover officer who multiple times told him that she was 17. He still showed up, according to authorities, to this parking lot in Bloomington with money and a condom on his person, and officers then took him into custody. And then this whole political drama unfolded. But Danny, you raise a great point that while there are these optics, there are these politics behind it. In fact, this really is a legal situation playing out and some very, very serious allegations. Now, we are awaiting a news conference from some leaders of the Senate. Danny, what are you hearing about that?
Yes, we'll hear an availability and we'll get to talk to leaders from both the GOP and the Democrats. So basically how this usually goes is the one party will talk to the media and then they'll leave, and then the next party will come on to the Senate floor, and then they'll talk. So we'll get a chance to ask questions. We did speak with the Senate GOP Minority Leader Mark Johnson yesterday. He did a very brief press conference before he went into a meeting with Governor Walz about the budget. And he did talk about the shocking nature of the allegations that they were going to attempt to potentially expel him and call for his resignation, which now has happened, of course. But this would be the first time we've heard from Senate DFL leadership, who then this morning did call for his resignation. So just getting some of those questions about, again, not to try to insinuate that anybody is defending the alleged conduct, but it is a fair question to why at first did the Senate DFL leadership not immediately call for his resignation? And of course, there's a lot of those dynamics in terms of the due process that they'd wanted to play out with their own member. And so that is probably the biggest pressing question that we'll get from DFL today.
Danny, has anyone heard from Justin Eichhorn yet?
No, that's a really good question. And actually, the Senate minority leader said he had not been able to communicate with him because he's been in custody. So now hearing that he's been released, I don't know if there's going to be a way for anybody to communicate with him. He had to draft a letter of resignation, I guess, from Hennepin County Jail. There's no other way he could have done it. He's in custody. And it's been no one has heard anything. We don't know who his attorney is. He's going to be in federal court later, so that may give us a little more insight. We have no idea what his defense is going to be at this point, or what he has said about anything. The first real communication anyone has gotten has been this letter of resignation, and we haven't seen what he said in that. So that'll be something to look for.
Yeah, KARE 11 has put in a request for that letter of resignation, which is a matter of public record because it was written by a state senator to resign from the body. And Danny, as you point out, Justin Eichhorn will be making an appearance in federal court this afternoon. It will be our first chance to see him, although federal court hearings are not televised. We are told he remains in federal custody right now, even though he's been released from the Hennepin County Jail. And this afternoon, after he makes that court appearance, we should learn whether he's allowed to go home, back to Grand Rapids, presumably with his family, or if he will remain in custody. I do want to show you the state Senate again right there. That is Justin Eichhorn's empty seat, for now remaining empty because he has officially tendered his resignation. Danny, this may be too early to get into all the details, but will there be a special election? What will happen to that seat, and who's going to represent the people of Grand Rapids and the surrounding areas?
Yeah, it'll go to special election. And Governor Walz did mention that yesterday in his press conference where he had called for Eichhorn to resign. He did mention the process now is that within, I believe, 5 days of learning there's a vacancy, so potentially 5 days from right now, the governor can call a special election that would happen within 30 days. So it's not going to take long. You'll get a special election in what is a safely red district. So another Republican will likely represent his seat. But that could happen in the next 4 to 6 weeks, I'm thinking. Before the end of the session, you'll probably have somebody else sitting in that seat representing District 6 up there in north central Minnesota.
Yeah, but doing the math in my head here, the session ends towards the end of May. You're talking 4 to 6 weeks. You're getting into the beginning of May, realistically, before someone is seated. I do wonder, even though Democrats now, they had a 1-seat majority before, a 2-seat majority now. Budget years are hard under normal situations. Often we are going to a special session because lawmakers simply can't agree on details in these bills. Danny, is anyone talking about that? Are they going to get a budget done?
Yeah, that's kind of the million-dollar question. Just with everything that's been going on in the House and the Senate, divided legislature now, it's going to take some real bipartisan work. But, interestingly, the media availability with the House Speaker, Republican Lisa Dameth, a couple of days ago, she was asked, saying, there's no way you're going to get this budget done, right, by May 19th. And she said, you know what, just watch us. She said, we're having conversations. We know it's a divided House and obviously divided legislature because of that, with the Senate and the House not under the same control of DFL party control that they had the last couple of years. But she said, just watch us. We've been through a lot of volatility, but she said, I think we can get it done. So it'll be interesting. And DFL leader Melissa Hortman in the House side has also said the same thing. So they're saying they're confident they can get it done. Maybe being a bipartisan push, they're just going to have to sit down and figure it out and just kind of get through all this to get the budget done.
That it would certainly be a good situation. I'm struck, Danny, I'm recalling yesterday during the news conference after the Feeding Our Future trial, where U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson talked about how Minnesota for so long had this reputation for good governance and people getting along and doing the people's work, and how, we have had some bumps in the road over the last few over the last year or so, certainly, including at this year's state legislature, and now with a state senator being charged with a really serious crime. But maybe getting some bipartisan work done to get a budget done would restore some faith in the body, Danny.
Yeah, I think so. And that is another thing that I was actually interested in asking that question of just how do you move forward, after something like this? And you have, just such a horrible allegation, but then now 2 members charged with felonies. It just does, it isn't something you've seen a lot in Minnesota. Not that there haven't been issues. I remember I used to work in New York State where the level of corruption was almost normalized there. And there was a reporter that had a countdown clock for when a lawmaker had last been arrested, and it never went longer than like a couple of months. And I remember coming here to Minnesota and thinking that doesn't really happen here. Not that it can't, but you see it has. And there's been a lot of scandal surrounding the legislature in recent years. But they will just have to move forward from this.
All right, Danny, that's a good analogy there. Native Chicagoan. I understand what you're saying about New York.
Yeah, certainly.
Well, we appreciate your coverage on this and standing by. I know Danny's going to be there asking questions, asking some hard questions as Senate leaders do a media availability later this morning or this afternoon. We will, of course, have the very latest for you coming up on KARE 11 News at 4, 5, and 6. And, of course, always follow the stream on KARE 11 News Now for the latest breaking news throughout the day.